Hi, I'm Lisa Cartwright at UC San Diego, and I'm so thrilled on behalf of the Department of Visual Arts and the Speculative Design Program to welcome the design and author team of the book Extra Bold, a feminist, inclusive, anti-racist, non-binary field guide for designers. It's a book that's just about to be released from Princeton Architectural Press, and we are thrilled to have a few of the authors with us here this morning. Ellen Lupton, Jennifer Tobias, Josh Halstead, Kaleena Sales, and Farah Kafei are here joining us. And I am going to turn things over now to Bryce Grubbs, who is a speculative design senior who will be introducing our speakers today. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Let's share my screen. Are we good? Awesome. All right. So on behalf of the Visual Arts Department, the Design Lab, and the major of Speculative Design at UC San Diego, it is my pleasure to welcome Josh Halstead and Ellen Lupton to our Saturday morning pop-up workshop series. My name is Bryce Grubbs, and I'm joining you from sunny San Diego, California, where I sit on Kumai land. I'm a senior majoring in spec design and minoring in math. I'm an emerging multidisciplinary conceptual artist and designer interested in queer space, world building, and institutional design as a way of reorganizing relationships between humans, resources, cities, and the wider environment. I'm quite excited to be welcoming Josh Halstead and Ellen Lupton to our winter spec design pop-up series. For a lot of reasons, mainly the timing that the book will be coming out feels to be really important. As we're having increased discussions of justice, equity, inclusion, and representation across a range of spaces, the need for a visual language that brings these discussions into a design space feels more pertinent than ever. And so as young artists and designers, as we're moving forward, we'll have this new language and it'll be a part of our toolkit. And we won't have to rely on previous tools and techniques that are sort of complicit in oppression and marginalization. And so for that, I'm quite excited for just ready to learn. So I first became exposed to Professor Lupton's work through some of the books. The first one was on Thinking on Type, and later D.I.Y. design, and then graphic design, the new basics. And I recently became aware of Professor Halstead's work, but have been really inspired by the way they talk about designing for non-majority groups as a way, as requiring you to work through the design process with the lens of that particular identity group throughout the entirety of the design process and not just something you sort of add on at the end. And that was something that just really resonated with me. So these are their socials. To the left is Ellen Lupton's Twitter, and to the right is Professor Halstead's Cryptjoy, which is a new project that they're working on, which is on Instagram, which I'll quickly talk about in their bio. So Josh Halstead is an epistemic activist working at the intersection of critical disability studies, design pedagogy, and community organizing, a recognized contributor to disability design discourse. They seek to unsubtle and rupture normative systems of thought by centering marginalized perspectives. Halstead has been an invited lecturer and academic in industry settings from Stanford to Google, and is co-author of the forthcoming book, Extra Bold, a feminist, inclusive, anti-racist, non-binary field guide for graphic designers. Their current project, Cryptjoy, is a transnational majority BIPOC community of practice focused on reworlding mental health through an intersectional, anti-ableist, and anti-sanist lens. Ellen Lupton serves as the Senior Curator at Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in New York City, and the Betty Cooke and William O. Steinmetz Design Chair at the Maryland Institute of College of Art in Baltimore. She is an American Academy of Arts and Sciences Fellow and an AIGA Lifetime Award Gold Medal winner. She's produced an astounding 20 books on graphic design, including D.I.Y, Design It Yourself, How Posters Work, Beautiful Users, Health Design Thinking, the ABCs of Triangle, Circle, Square, the Bauhaus and Design Theory, Design is Storytelling, Swarm, the Fabric Workshop and Museum, Thinking with Type, among many more. She's also a contributor to several publications, including Print, AIGA, Metropolis, and the New York Times. Oh man, it got cut off. That's unfortunate. Professor Halstead and Lupton will be telling us about Extra Bold, a feminist, inclusive, anti-racist, non-binary field guide for graphic designers, a book co-authored by Lupton and Halstead with Farah Kafei, Jennifer Tobias, Kaleena Sales, Leslie Shaw, and Valentina Vergara. Extra Bold will be out with Princeton Architectural Press later this spring. And so Professor Halstead and Lupton will be speaking with us for about half an hour or so, followed by a Q&A. So those of you out there in Zoom, please make sure your mics are muted during the talk. And if you've joined us on YouTube, please make sure to post your questions and comments in that space, and we'll make sure to bring them up during the Q&A. For those of you on Zoom, you can post your comments and questions in the chat and or unmute yourself when the Q&A begins. And the Q&A will be moderated by PhD student Mai Nichols. And so finally, please join me in welcoming Josh Halstead and Ellen Lupton for a celebration of their new book along with their co-authors.
Thank you, Bryce. That was incredible. What a beautiful introduction. I'm going to grab the screen here and take you on a little tour. What we decided to do was talk about kind of how the book got made. And it's a very collaborative project. It started one night. I was at an event at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, and it was an event organized by two amazing young women, Farah Kafei and Valentina Vergara, and they had put together an exhibition about women in design as their senior project, because they felt that as design students at Pratt, they hadn't really had a diverse set of design heroes to look up to. Whenever they were given a kind of list of designers to research or designers to reference, it was a pretty uniform group. So they took it upon themselves to change that. And I attended an event that they organized, and I was just so amazed by the energy in the room, not only their energy, but the energy of the audience, that I thought, wouldn't it be great to do a book that filled in some of those blanks and also provided a kind of theoretical framework for thinking about a more inclusive design practice and tips for entering the field, like a workbook, a book about our heritage, a book about opening up the practice, and a book about being a designer in today's world. So it was such a thrill to meet them. And Farah's here today on Zoom, which is really cool. So she can say hello later. And they joined me in this project. And throughout the authoring of the book, which took, I guess, 2 years, to really put the whole thing together, they were critics, they were contributors, they interviewed designers that they knew of in the field and created incredible edited pieces for us. And they critiqued the book. They helped us make it more appropriate to our audience through really improving the illustrations and layouts and so forth. So that was really cool. And these are some of the interviews that they created for the book. And there's maybe a dozen interviews throughout the book of people really talking about work and talking about how they work in the field of design. My dear friend Jennifer Tobias joined our team as illustrator in chief and historian and writing contributor, and we had so much fun. And one of the things that I've really learned from this project and several others that I've done over the past few years is that really collaborating is much more fun than working all by yourself. So for those of you who are students in the room, I just urge you to find opportunities to collaborate. And there's so many reasons for that. One is that one person doesn't have all the answers. And especially if you're confronting a subject like inclusive design, one person can't include everybody. So collaborating is really important, and it's really fun. So I'm going to show you just some of the spreads of the book that feature Jennifer's outstanding illustrations. This is her illustration of intersectionality. So in the book, we talk about the theory of intersectionality in terms of people's identities and where they fit in terms of power structures being overlapping positions. And the original metaphor of the intersection created by Kimberly Crenshaw, a great Black legal scholar, what she had in mind was a traffic intersection and somebody being hit by cars coming in two directions, which is a really chilling image. But that's the metaphor that she was writing about. And we thought, well, it'd be so cool to illustrate that. And so the book is kind of a mix of a comic book, zine, manifesto, how-to guide. It's very visual. It's got lots of words in it, but lots of pictures as well. And I'm going to try to describe some of the spreads here to add visual description to our experience this morning. So what you see here is a biography of the artist and designer Ani Albers, and the biography is set up as a flow chart. And as you read the biography, it's a bit of a game, and you can make a choice between, say, staying at home and being an easel painter, or knocking on the door of a famous expressionist artist. And so as you follow through the game, Ani makes certain choices and you can make them with her. And she ultimately ends up at the Bauhaus and then comes to America. And so it's a fun way to tell a story. We tell the story of historic figures in the book. These are two incredible queer icons of design. Susan Sontag, illustrated here by Jennifer on the left. The illustration is based on a famous photograph of Sontag on an Eames lounge chair. So she is shown full figure, relaxing, very confident in her body on this classic mid-century chair. And she's facing the amazing fashion designer, Willi Smith. And this portrait is a bit more of a fantasy. It's not based on a real photograph. We're showing Willi Smith also lounging, and he is sitting on furniture designed by his good friend, Dan Friedman. And so they're together having a conversation in the book. And we talk about their life and their ideas and their theories. But throughout the book, we really want to show all the subjects and all the people in like the most human and engaging way possible. This is a spread from the book about confidence equity. And confidence equity is a principle we developed about the idea that confidence in the workplace or in a classroom should be shared among people. And some people happen to have more confidence than others. And it's kind of our responsibility as a community to help everybody be confident, because confidence doesn't just come from within. It's actually something that we learn from signals from other people, right? So if socially you are often entrusted with projects or asked for advice, you are going to be confident. And if you're not treated in that manner, your confidence is going to suffer. So we have an illustration here of a female airline pilot, and the drawing is in the style of a safety card in an airplane. And this pilot is projecting confidence through her body language, through her uniform, through her authoritative voice, through her ability to help others on the airplane. But people also invest confidence in her, right? She gathers confidence from people because they trust her and demonstrate their trust in her. And this is an idea that is really key for thinking about equity and equity in a classroom or equity in a workplace. We have an illustration here of the idea of imposter syndrome, and it shows a name tag that says, "Hello, my name is Imposter." And the idea of imposter syndrome is something you may be familiar with, where you may have experienced it yourself. I certainly have, where you feel doubt in your own abilities, even when you have demonstrated, that you own the stage, that this is your project, this is your work, you still doubt yourself. And sometimes that imposter feeling is actually being projected on us by other people. So we have to be very careful using this term imposter syndrome, because it kind of blames the person who's feeling doubt instead of questioning the social environment that may be causing that person to feel doubt. And this incredible image by Jenny is an illustration of the inside of a copy machine. And the copy machine is inhabited by little people who are running around in this factory of productivity, printing and binding and editing and designing and reading. And this is an illustration from our chapter on publishing. And so in our discussion about work and what it means to be working as a designer, we talk about that as a career, as a job that you get paid to do, but also that your work and your career is much bigger than that. It includes your work as an activist, as a volunteer, as someone who gives lectures or writes books, right? Which I guarantee you there's no money in that. But it's something that, my side hustle is writing books like this one and collaborating with incredible people to do it. So that's a little bit of creativity. As we developed the book, we invited more people to contribute. And Jenny and I were talking this morning, like it's like ninjas gathering more ninjas around them in order to conquer the world and achieve their goals. And one of those designers and contributors is Leslie Jha. And Leslie contributed this incredible article about how to come out at work and about the need to determine safety and what are the conditions in which you might share your gender identity at work among people who might not be familiar with it. And Leslie's work is so incredible, we asked them to also be really a critic for the whole book and to read the whole thing and give us like honest, unvarnished opinion, like how is it going? So in addition to contributing incredible content like this, Leslie also told us this: the book needs more authors, that it wasn't enough to have interviews with designers of color or to have essays by designers of color or designers with disabilities. We really had to invite them to be authors of the book and to do more. So I'm so honored that Kaleena Sales joined our team and contributed incredible pieces about the teaching that she does at Tennessee State University, a historically Black university, and what she has learned from her students and what everybody should learn from her students about design. And she defined theoretical principles like equity and equality and systemic racism in beautiful essays that are written from her personal point of view. So theory coming in touch with life, which is really what this book is all about. And Josh Halstead is here today, and he's my co-presenter today. And he wrote incredible material about disability theory, and artists and designers who are disabled that contributes such incredible, authentic material to the book. So I'm really excited to turn the stage over to Josh to talk about his work. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Actually, I was wondering, Ellen, would you mind continuing to present? You have the slides up, right?
Oh yes, of course.
Is that okay? That way we just
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I only have a few slides. So this is the caricature of me. This is my name. It's really wonderful to be here. Thank you so much. Also, Bryce, thank you for the introduction. I was blushing, so I really appreciate that. So it's a highly collaborative project. And I wanted to just start with this quote by Bell Hooks. It's something that I read a while ago and has really impacted not just my teaching practice, but also how I show up as an academic in multiple places and how my body works with that. And I feel like it's kind of a broader statement on the book. So it's the idea of the body as a site, not just for theorizing, but re-theorizing, right? And I think most of us, especially in the spec design program at UCSD, would probably understand what that means. So Hooks writes in the closing of this chapter on body and theorizing, I'm grateful to the many people who dare to create theory from the location of pain and struggle, who courageously expose wounds to give us their experience to teach and guide as a means to chart new theoretical journeys. Their work is liberatory. If we create feminist theory, feminist movements that address pain, we will have no difficulty building a mass-based feminist resistance struggle. There will be no gap between feminist theory and feminist practice. So for me, the idea of centering bodies, right, is not very far from the project of this book, right? Essentially, it's a corpus of diverse bodies who have our own kind of situated expertise and lived experience that are then using and leveraging and mobilizing that lived experience to make, one, to kind of theorize and re-theorize the contours of design, or graphic design in this case, but then also kind of make inroads for hermeneutical access and justice, right? So folks can see themselves in the pages. Folks might be able to name certain things they might not have been able to name before. And we kind of look at the long-standing project of what this book, I think, starts to do. Both those kind of axes are really important. So on the next slide, a really fun thing that I got to do is write not just pieces of my own, but also highlight disabled people who are central to disability rights and disability justice movements and disability design. So in the book, we're foregrounding folks that might be left out of history books, specifically design history books, right? So folks like Ed Roberts, folks like Neil Marcus, who is a disabled dancer, poet, performing artist, who created a zine in the 80s that looks a lot like David Carson, but we might not know it. So part of this kind of historicizing of marginalized perspectives into graphic design is kind of this way of having a defiant memory, right? Revisiting histories, rewriting histories, and then re-presenting that in contemporary books. So the next page moves into some contemporary case studies, right? So folks like Hannah and Shannon Finnegan, who are both designers and folks who work with representation, photography, activism. So the hopes in this was to just be able to present not just the theoretical, right, but also the praxis, and making sure that we continually kind of link back and forth. So I'm excited about those pieces. I have two pieces in the book that are personal writing. The first runs fairly close to a talk that I gave at AIGA and also Creative Mornings, which is available online, but it's outlining 3 dominant paradigms of disability: medical, social, and identity, and kind of questioning, well, what does it mean to frame disability and access through these paradigms? How do design questions shift? How do design outcomes and processes shift when we kind of move through these different frameworks. So that's exciting and fun. I think the next page, yep. Also to give some image descriptions, there's an image here of the Capitol Crawl, which is a very kind of important movement in 1990. It was kind of a demonstration right in front of the Capitol building where disabled folks, I'm using identity first language purposefully for folks who might be questioning online, crawled up the stairs of the Capitol building to kind of demonstrate that access, there's no ramps and access hasn't been a priority in kind of federal structures. That led to the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which helps us as designers make access a widespread thing. And also we have a image down here at the bottom, designed and created by Jennifer White Johnson, who is a Black disabled artist as well, in Latinx, and it's the fist with the autism symbol, and the text reads, Black Disabled Lives Matter. So that's that. Since we have a little bit of time and we're talking about a book, I wanted to do a reading, because why not? The piece that I wanted to read is Embodied Learning, and it really gets to the heart of what it means to kind of think about bodies as sites for theories, bodies as sites for pedagogy. So I won't explain it too much, but I'm going to do that. It's 4 pages. I'm dyslexic and I read slowly, so thanks for your patience and graciousness. And here we go.
Josh, do you want me to stop sharing so we're more present with you as you read, or would you like the image on the screen?
I think
it's your call.
Yeah, I think the image is fine.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, otherwise you'll just be looking at my forehead.
Okay, great.
Which is fine. That's a good question. Okay. And I will say, like, the piece also invites you to do a little bit of embodied practice yourself. So it is interactive, so feel free to do that as well. Okay, so embodied learning. April Coughlin is an educator, scholar, and self-identified wheeler, quote unquote. Bearing an apparent disability, Coughlin has experienced discrimination throughout her career as a high school and college professor. One morning, a 7th grader in her English class remarked, "We don't have to show you respect like other teachers because you're in a wheelchair." Shaken, Coughlin searched for a response while suppressing the pain. This student didn't know that she was a first-year teacher. They didn't know she'd been staying up until 4 a.m. every night working on lesson plans. And they couldn't possibly know how challenging it was for a new teacher fresh out of grad school to manage 35 students. Didn't she deserve a little respect? Apparently not. She was different. Alas, Coughlin's story is not unique. Lateef McLeod, Sonoya Taylor, Tobin Siebers, and many others have written about the politics of corporeal orthodoxy and dissent. In this essay, I join this lineage and foreground embodiment as a tool of self-knowledge and design insight. To be embodied is to understand ourselves as undivided and reflexive body, mind, spirit, social, relational beings. The body gives us direct access to embodiment, and in so doing, becomes a locus for learning. Internal proprioception, or cognizance of the movement and composition of one's own integrated body, grants us access to our emotions, sensations, and desires. To acknowledge these sensory modes of knowledge is to resist binary oppositions such as subject-object, mind-body, and nature-culture. Coughlin was objectified and devalued early in her career for appearing different from other teachers, but she later realized that this experience had shaped her, and she cultivated an embodied pedagogy that challenged dualist modes of knowing. On field trips, she and students ride the subway together. If an elevator is out of service, students join in carrying her up and down stairs. In the process, they learn about physical access and social justice issues firsthand, not merely thinking or reading about the topic, but through direct embodied experience. Coughlin teaches through her body, not in spite of it. Like Coughlin, I had to learn to value my body unapologetically. When I first moved to San Francisco, where I live now, I took a longer route to work just to avoid catching a view of my stiff gait in the glossy towers on Market Street. I wasn't exactly ashamed of my body, but I'd internalized the ableist narrative that by graduating from college and moving to the city on my own, I'd somehow escaped this idea of disability. My reflection was a constant reminder that I hadn't. As my career progressed, I had the opportunity to teach an introductory graphic design course at UC Berkeley Extension. Like many first-time teachers, I threw myself into hours of research and preparation. One evening, while building a lecture on postmodern design, I came across Barbara Kruger's 1989 silkscreen, untitled "Your Body is a Battleground," pictured here to the right on the screen. Kruger, artist and fierce feminist, devised this piece for the Women's March on Washington in 1989 in the wake of mounting US anti-abortion laws. The image became a well-known political symbol for women's rights. Bodies are not just skin, muscles, and bones, I realized. They are political battlegrounds. How is my disabled body linked to those women fighting for reproductive freedom? Could disability be an important political identity rather than a fleshy glitch? This marked a turning point in my orientation toward design. Being embodied is a process of constant becoming. We are always either moving toward or away from embodied presence. When we are closer, we feel connected to our sentient selves, fully in our bodies, aware of our feelings and emotions, fully alive. When we are distanced, we may feel trapped in our thoughts, alienated, ready to snap. Centering is at the heart of practice, is at the heart of the practice of being and becoming embodied. Coming back to our center opens up space in our bodies, affording more options for our actions and decisions. The first time I was introduced to centering, my teacher, Thomas Rothenberg, asked me, "What would it be like if you lived life through your legs?" At first thought, there was nothing particularly significant about my legs. Stomach, arms, feet, all the same. What he was suggesting, however, was that I try spending less time in my head, something that maybe us designers and academics might relate with. Designers often talk about knowing users. How could they achieve, designers often talk about knowing their users. How could they achieve that without first knowing themselves? Centering helps us come home to embodied presence, and as artist and organizer Kimi Hamauer writes, embrace groundlessness, multiplicity, fluidity, and change. In the process, we can become designers who are more comfortable with complexity and ambiguity. So I'm going to the last two pages, which aren't pictured here. And it does get a little bit more interactive, so feel free to settle in, move around, do anything you have to do, whether you're affirming or transgressing social norms on Zoom, it's fine with me, it doesn't matter. Okay. So, how to center the body, next section. To arrive at the present moment, try to drop your awareness to the level of sensation. Notice your heartbeat, breath, temperature, and muscular tensions. Depending on the senses available to you, what do you hear, smell, taste, feel, and see? Is your mood heavy or light? Is it dispersed evenly or collected in particular areas? The following guide uses spatial dimensions, length, width, and depth, as a framework for centering bodily knowledge and agitating the politics of design. This exercise derives from First Nation practices and draws specifically on the somatic teachings of Richard Strozzi Heckler and my teacher, Thomas Rothenberg. Length equals dignity, the next section. To become aware of your length, begin at the crown of your head and relax your scalp, ears, jaw, throat, shoulders, chest, back, rib cage. Take another deep breath and continue through the rest of your physical body. This is your length and your dignity. Social forces define our bodies from the outside. Our bodies are raced, sexed, gendered, abled, disabled, and more. For example, I don't inhabit only a disabled body. I also occupy a body that's been policed by gender norms. The effeminate man undermines standards of masculinity. The philosopher Aristotle, in his study of metaphysics, established a tendency in Western society to smooth complexity into transcendental categories, and our bodies, shaped by internal and external forces, wear those scars. The physical environment shapes us too. I have an urban body rather than a suburban or rural body. I can't see the horizon from my 7th floor apartment in San Francisco, and my body noticeably shifts when I can see it. Rebirth Garments is a fashion company tailored to bodies that occupy myriad genders, sizes, and disabilities. The company was founded in Chicago by Sky Kubakub, a non-binary queer and disabled Filipinx designer. They write, "For me, every day is a performance where I bring my body as a kinetic sculpture into the consciousness of the people I interact with. I embody the spirit of radical visibility, and Rebirth Garments is my soft armor." Sky is always cloaked with brilliant colors, textured fabrics, and a hint of chainmail. Rebirth Garment embraces the bodies and fashion society often rejects and punishes. Sky amplifies identity and reshapes dignity, one outfit at a time. The next section is called Width, Belonging. It's one of 2 remaining sections. Width is the dimension of our social, relational being. The Lakota people say all of my relations. Feel the energy around you, people, animals, trees, sun, moon, and the cosmos. Notice your body expanding. This is the dimension of belonging. All day, our bodies react to social situations by expanding and contracting, reshaping to fit in. Philosophers Deleuze and Guattari wrote, "We know nothing about a body until we know what it can do." In other words, what its affects are, how they can and cannot enter into composition with other affects. Affect, and to oversimplify, form and capacities, is shaped in relation to the people and social forces around us. Your network includes your family, friends, neighborhood, institutions, and social norms that enforce various expectations. Services, systems, and labor practices distribute penalties and privileges to people based on their bodies. Robert Warsher, Project Meta Interview, critiques verbal supremacy and celebrates nonverbal bodies. This interactive exhibit, which is pictured in the book, invites 2 people to have a conversation. Words and gestures are translated into sound and light. The installation matches movements produced by the eyes, mouth, hands, eyes, and entire body with soundscapes and fluid light patterns, thus making a home and a feeling of belonging for marginalized senses. And the last section that I'll finish on is called Depth and Time. Finally, consider the dimension of depth. Lean back slightly and feel the presence of your ancestors, mentors, and past experiences. Notice the back of your head, shoulders, hips, and when you are ready, the cavern of your heart. This is the dimension of time. Feel yourself emerge at the intersection of past and present, fully embodied in the present moment. My history included discovering the field of disability studies and learning about the civil rights movement and disability justice. I became a graphic designer in the 7th grade, the day I created a sticker for my Led Zeppelin cover band. I was 16 when I took my first design class at a local art school. My instructor, Jim Wojtowicz, fanned out a stack of ray gun magazines designed by David Carson, and I was immediately excited by Carson's spliced, jagged, messy constructions. Later, I met the artist Neil Marcus, whose performances celebrate the idiosyncratic movements and contours of his own body. seeing Marcus's collages, self-published zine in the self-published zine, Special Effects, made me think of Carson. Back when I was a teenager, I must have sensed a tacit link between my body and Carson's unruly typographic style. And that's the end of that. So just to close, I guess, the questions I think that I'm asking and many of the folks who are co-authors and contributors to this are asking what it means, right? What does it mean for us to kind of center our body, right, in the construction of theory, in the construction of pedagogy, and specifically in our own work? So I'm thrilled to be a part of it, and I'm also thrilled just to be in this space with all of you.
Thank you so much, Ellen and Josh. I have so much that's come up in what both of you have said, but I think because we do have a few other people in the Zoom with us, I think it would be important to hear a little bit from, we can just go one by one. If Farah, if you wanted to add anything about your experience working on the book, and then maybe we'll hear also from Jennifer and Kaleena because you're here. Thank you both so much.
Sure. Hi, I'm Farah. I'm the student that Ellen, well, I was the student that Ellen spoke about in the very beginning, and kind of the birth story of the book. And this has all been a dream. I'm still like beyond baffled that I'm a part of this. And yeah, I mean, I'm still mind blown, but when Ellen and Jenny approached us about collaborating on this book, Valentina and I, it really like gave us power. And I think that's one thing I just want to say is I'm so grateful for, because it was the start of, we were leaving college and I had so many frustrations about how that had gone. And really this book is like everything that I wanted and wished for, and everything that was missing from my education. And something, again, that like, you're paying so much money to go to these amazing schools, Pratt Institute in New York. My expectations were so high and there was so much missing from it. So many gaps that I couldn't see myself reflected in, et cetera. So it's just really an honor to be a part of this and to be here and to have this object that I'm sure is going to impact so many people's lives and careers. So yeah, it's really exciting.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Ellen, in the beginning of your talk, as you were speaking about collaboration, I think that's such a huge takeaway from this book. I mean, having these different experiences are really what lead to the production of different forms of knowledge, so that it's not just about, what you're reading in books and theory, but actually the experience that's leading to these different, what was seen as different forms of ableism are actually being like totally brought to the side, so that we can say, well, what is sound teaching us? What is touch teaching us? What is smell teaching us? And debunk this whole predominance of vision, especially. I wanted to hear from Jennifer. Did you have anything to add or want to share about your experience in general?
Oh, Jennifer, you're
just on mute, unmuting.
So frustrating. Just that it was great. It was great fun. Ellen and I have been working together in various crazy forms for years, and these two books, these three books, several books, books, have just been such a learning opportunity for me. And yeah, I second what she said about, finding collaborators early on. I think we met over a stat camera, which is an ancient piece of technology that you will fortunately not know, at design school. And yeah. But I'd really like to hear more from Kaleena, who's off, really just gave the book substance and dimension, and both theoretical and real world substance that we could not have brought otherwise.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sort of with Farah. I'm in disbelief that I'm in this space and really honored to be included in this project. So I teach graphic design at an HBCU, which is serving mostly Black students. And so I've spent some time just reflecting on that experience and what their challenges are that are specific to, you know, their upbringing and their socioeconomic status and everything that kind of deals with their identity, and confronting some of the challenges of entering a field that doesn't really reflect their identity. And so what does it mean to like be influenced by your visual landscape or your community, and then do work that sort of serves a really Eurocentric kind of design standards. And so I write about that and reflect about that in my observations. I also talk a little bit about my own journey. You know, it really, the section about confidence equity, I did not write, but it it speaks to me, you know, and I think as a Black designer, particularly if you come from like a lower income, like community, and you're first generation college student like myself and a lot of my students, you don't always feel like you belong. You don't always feel like you're a part of, you know, this industry. And so it's so great to see the like honesty and vulnerability reflected in the writings and the essays. So yeah, so just wanted to share that and say I'm really excited about the book. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Kaleena. I think that's definitely speaking to this aspect of letting others feel welcome, because you're making yourself sort of vulnerable about your experiences and sort of saying that we don't all come at this from the same angle. So feel free to, sorry, I'm just trying to check if there's any questions coming in. So if you haven't already, don't be shy. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, feel free to add your questions in. And I'm going to go ahead and ask a question we had from Ricardo Dominguez, who asks, for all of the community who co-created the book, you're sort of sharing these multiple connections and processes. But do you think there are differences in terms of design gestures to some degree? So I guess asking about maybe if there were tensions within the book. It sounds like, Ellen, you kind of had a lot of important decisions to make about how to sort of navigate the actual book. So maybe you want to speak to that question?
My dogs are barking. That's why I muted myself while Josh was reading. Oh my gosh, I couldn't even find the control. I really became the producer of the book. So like I started out as, you know, lead author. And as the team grew and became more complex, and not just the 7 co-authors, but also dozens of other contributions through interviews and short essays, incredible, many people in addition to the 7 of us. You know, to me, it became more about, I guess, the way a movie producer is just trying to bring all the talent together, right? Like we have all this talent, and how can I help make it shine and use my knowledge from 30 years of publishing books, like to make all this beautiful content from these beautiful people shine. And in terms of like the design aesthetic, I remember early meetings with Farah and Valentina where they were like, this book looks like it's for middle school girls. And they would show us like really edgy illustrations, and we couldn't quite be that edgy because we're like, you know, middle-aged ladies, and we're just not edgy. But we tried our best, and we made it like a little bit more grown up. So we really appreciate that kind of feedback. You know, and my husband was like, too many fonts. So we made it, I guess, more Western European, like one font.
Yeah, I think there were two things I learned from the process, just trying to respond to that question of, tensions and also figuring out, working as a group. And yeah, just thinking about, like, it originally started out as like a novel, and then it was going to be that, and just as a designer or a scholar, I'm sort of more used to, like, there's a procedure and you follow it, but it's like
we had no procedure.
We had no procedure. The joy and the terror was that it was so infinitely flexible. We knew it was going to be a book, but that was pretty much it. But then I would also say, having worked on like with other artists and, sort of very fuzzy projects, that I think, group projects are fraught. And I think that what Ellen really brought to it was the best of a producer, a showrunner, or, like, you do need a certain structure. Like, you guys are studying speculative design, so everything's on the table. But, there's still, for me at least, that old school, like, there's got to be some structure or you're going to explode. So I think that's something that Ellen, like, she could, even though we took these wild, loops and curves, and, the Seven Samurai kind of, kept growing and getting bigger and, defending the town. I still had that sense of, like, oh, right, Ellen knows what's going on. And she could kind of make these calls to sort of shape it into this coherent thing. I don't know what anybody, Farah, Kaleena's experience was, but that was certainly mine.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, it sounds like you also need different skill sets when you're collaborating. And so some people are bringing an experiential knowledge of the world through, tactile or through different sort of senses that are in different hierarchies for them. And so it's important to have people that can do certain things and then the others that pick up on the other parts. That's why, honestly, the whole collaborative aspect, I think, is so compelling and so important right now for academics who are working on single books, or designers who are just, you really need to bridge those gaps in order for design to progress, because you have to think about who's using these things, these objects. And I think that's a really important part of this book that really excited me. We had a question about from Gabi Shafson, who is no longer with us at UCSD, but he was an alum of the program who recently graduated. And he's asking a question to Ellen, sort of about your past and how that sort of informs the book. I don't know if you wanted to touch on, because you have written Beautiful Users, and then how did that sort of shift into focusing on designers and users who are at the same sort of margins that figures like Dreyfus really created in their work?
Yeah, so I did a book called Beautiful Users in 2014, which definitely deals with disability studies. It's how I met Bess Williamson, who's an incredible scholar in the disability studies field. So that was a learning experience for me. But what it didn't do was actually include all those people in the process. And like the last chapter of the book was about the revenge of the user and users becoming makers, which is, very important, and the user as producer. But in terms of like the idea of inclusive design, that really didn't happen in that book. And so to me, this has been so exciting just to like open up the process. And like in an early draft of the book, I had this like checklist of like how to make an accessible website, which is like so not what thinking about design for disability should be. Like I could get that online. I Googled it this morning. How am I going to make the ebook accessible? And I was like Googling to make sure the way we were doing it was correct. That was confirmed it is correct. But it's like to really look at accessibility, I had to work with Josh, who brought this level of theoretical inquiry that was equal to what Kaleena was writing about systemic racism, or what Leslie and I were writing about non-binary typography and theory of binary systems. So yeah, collaborating is really important.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there was going to be a more accessible kind of ebook coming out with this later.
Yeah, and I could show you that, but we kind of ran out of time. But basically, an ebook is a website. It's an HTML document, and so if you structure the ebook the way you would an accessible website with, you know, rationally organized H1 to H2, all that, then you have a document that can be read by a screen reader and used by people who are print disabled. The big sticking point is images and how to make images accessible. And so we're doing that with alt texts, which is also part of the HTML system and is a workable way to have image descriptions, which is really easy if it's like a drawing of a person. You go portrait, line drawing of Kaleena Sales. But some of the graphics have 500 words like in the graphic. So we transcribed everything. It was a huge project to do that, and super interesting, like to look at each image and say, well, what would someone who can't see the image, what information do they need? And we erred on the side of more rather than less, and not making the assumption that somebody wouldn't care about that. Oh, why would a blind person need to know that? Why would a person who has difficulty with reading need that? We erred on put it all in. You know, that the reader should choose what they do or don't think is important.
Yeah, that seems to relate to also your exhibit on touch and this idea of like providing more text or another story for the video that's happening, because it just creates more content for users to sort of engage with and take. Basically, there's more there for them to approach it from different angles. Bryce, did you want to jump in and ask Grace's question?
Sure, I was just scribbling down some notes. I was like, oh, that was good. Let's see. Okay, so Grace asks, if you are able to completely redesign today's cities for a more inclusive tomorrow, what would be some of the things you would change first? And so this is sort of directed at sort of all the authors we have here today, the co-authors we have here today.
Maybe Josh, you want to start with that?
That's a huge question. Oh my God. Another drink of coffee. Oh man, I mean, the easy answer is like, you know, hire a diverse, you know, pay a diverse body of disabled folks and intersectional folks at the city level and design with them, right? Like that would be something super important that couldn't, I mean, it's going to transcend guidelines, right? I mean, man, oh man. There is a ton of really interesting things happening with smart cities right now and access. How do we kind of use audio and haptics? I'm kind of trying to stick in my lane here for a second. Audio and haptics for wayfinding and navigation through cities. I think that's really interesting, and especially when it kind of hits the intersection of the Internet of Things, right? So kind of thinking about how, you know, the technologies and the spaces that we move through can both kind of work together and both kind of be mutually alive and constitutive. That's one way to think about it. But, you know, I being in this space, I think we can't like think about inclusive cities without also kind of considering the cultures and the art that we're creating, right? That kind of reflects back what we're doing as folks. So cultural spaces, art spaces are super important. So it's a huge question. I mean, we could spend hours and hours and hours on that, but it's a really provocative question that I think some other folks on the call would be able to answer from their standpoints as well.
Does anyone else want to address that? I mean, I live in a racially segregated city, and that seems like one huge problem that then leads to segregated education and segregated healthcare and income disparity. So that's like a huge inclusive design problem.
Yeah,
I think I'd want it to be sustainable and equitable. And that's about as far as I can think about it.
Kaleena, did you want to address that?
Yeah, I was kind of just similar to what you said. I think about income disparity and, I mean, affordable housing, gentrification issues, food deserts. I mean, there's so many different things that sort of are under that umbrella. But yeah, it's a big question.
Bryce, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah. There's one thing that's on my mind. I was actually talking about it, like brainstorming a potential project for it in another class, but it was around sort of, it was around diversity. And so one of the questions we were playing around with was sort of, I feel like there's been an increased push to talk about having, diverse groups of individuals and decision-making spaces, and just sort of, and so I guess the thing that I was interested in was sort of the full thesis statement for having diverse groups of folks in these spaces. Like, it's said a lot, but then what's the outcome? Like, we have these people in these spaces, great, but that doesn't always imply that certain decisions are being made in the best interest of like other marginalized groups, even though these spaces are more diverse. So like, could you guys sort of, I don't know, expand on that, talk about why it's important and what we get from having diverse and inclusive spaces?
I mean, I'll jump in there. One of the pieces in our book is by Maurice Cherry about why are there not more Black graphic designers? And his research, which builds on the research of Cheryl D. Miller from 30 years ago, so little has changed, is about the importance of creating a visual culture that represents everybody. So we're talking about graphic design, which builds products, architecture, signage, magazines, websites, Kaleena, you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that it's just really important when people talk about diversity that we don't think about it in terms of, more Black and brown faces, that it's really about a diverse experience, diverse perspectives, diverse points of views, and that those things really enrich the design that, we're putting out into the world. When I look at the work that my students are creating, they really are pulling from, the media that they consume and like their families and just, and so those things might look really different, based on sort of, where you're from. And so that's why diversity is really important. It comes out of us and into our design work. But I will say too that, we have to be really careful not to, I think unfortunately with this like push towards diversity, there is a move towards just like optics and sort of, tokenism and some ways to avoid that is just to make sure that there are resources in place behind some of those like diverse hires. So there's resources that support with time, and attention, and that we're listening to diverse hires and listening to their ideas and their contributions, and that we're creating structures or support systems to help them move up into the various industries that they're in. And so there's a lot that needs to kind of support the push behind diversity that I think sometimes gets left out of the conversation. So.
Yeah, I would love to follow up on that really quickly because I think it's important. I think so, often, at least in my experience, when we have conversations on diversity and inclusion at a top level, there's kind of this assumption, like kind of utopic assumption that there's like a reset button somewhere where you just like hit the button and then like it's all possible. And it's possible at a top level, right? And what we often, I think, forget, or at least give less airtime to, is so if we're designing things more inclusively and we're having diverse folks in the room designing, that means that like all those processes that were created to exclude them, right, are going to have to change, and they change over time, right? So an example that I give folks is like just me getting coffee. It's really funny, so I get coffee at, like a Starbucks, like this morning, right? And the first time I walk into the line in a new place, they don't know me, right? So they kind of, and I just for ease, I have folks help, even in the pandemic, help me open up my phone, grab my credit card, do my signature, put the top on, set up the whole glass, etc. So the first time I walk into a coffee shop, it's like I'm educating the whole design system. Can you please help me with my phone, my credit card? Can you please put 2 cups in the coffee because it's hot on my hand, etc. Right? And this happens for about a week, 2 weeks. But as I kind of continue to go into this space, over and over and over and over again, it's really brilliant, I think, to see that whole social system change. Where I'll open the door 2 weeks, 3 weeks in, and all of a sudden, not only do they know me by name, but they've already constructed this assembly line behind the desk where someone's ready to do the credit card. They already kind of understand what I need for the coffee, and then I kind of walk out. But I think that example speaks to the larger implications of what it means for diversity and inclusion to really be embodied in design practices, is that we have to be willing, to walk into a place like Starbucks, right? It's going to move into, however we're moving into spaces like that, and be okay with the unsettledness of systems changing, and it takes time. So
thank you for that example. That really sheds light on how much we need to sort of see how things that aren't working anymore maybe need to shift. If something is no longer sort of benefiting, because it's not, you take for granted, or people assume that there is a certain way of moving or thinking or seeing, but what if that isn't the majority? What if there isn't a normal, So I think a lot of this is about really moving away from assumption that this would be convenient, because who's actually behind it? At least that's what I'm hearing. Cindy, did you want to share your question, and maybe we'll end on your last question on that as a, if you felt comfortable sharing, otherwise I can read it out. Okay, I'll read it out. So we have a question from, Cindy Aguirre Medina, who is a speculative design major, and she's asking about Josh. She was saying your audiobook would be audiobook version would be really nice, because she really enjoyed, and so did I. I'm sure the rest of the audience can agree that we really enjoyed you kind of leading us through that that guided practice of kind of coming back to the body. Could you speak to, I kind of asked earlier about whether there might be an ebook, would that be a component of it? She's saying she thought it was really special to hear the voice of someone else guiding her through the practice. And it would be a format that would be very useful for certain disabled groups.
Yeah, I mean, so I will say, and I think Ellen, you can also speak to this, is the ebook is actively being constructed, right? So audio is definitely an important feature. And if you think about it as an ebook, there's ample opportunities to integrate something like that. I don't know if you want my voice.
Well, they're really two different editions.
Yeah.
So an ebook is text, and someone with a screen reader turns it into audio, but it's a mechanical voice, which people that use ebooks, use audio screen readers, are very used to that voice, and often listen to it speeded up like 400%. They have their own way of interacting with that technology. An audio book we had not considered, and I think it's a lovely idea. And it would be nice to have maybe our 7 authors take turns reading all the material. We can't have all 30 contributors, but the 7 of us, that would be interesting. Whether there's really a market for it and whether we can support producing that, I'm not sure, but it's a beautiful idea.
It's a good idea. Extra bold, greatest hits.
I mean, I use a lot of audiobooks because I like to listen to books when I'm doing something else.
Yeah.
Reading is very passive, but walking and listening to a book is really fun. So we probably do that, but not describe the pictures. Just turn it into what would an audio only So it's about the theory, it's about Kaleena's stories, it's about Josh's stories, it's the interviews with Christy Tillman, and it would be really the text. That's a cool idea, it's doable.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think I'm going to be respectful of everyone's time. I wanted to thank you again, Ellen and Josh and Kaleena, Jennifer, Farah, on behalf of the Speculative Design Program and all of us in UC San Diego. Thanks also Bryce and Lisa for helping bring us all together. And we look forward to using your book in the years to come. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks for having us. Thanks all my co-authors. So cool that you came. I'm really so excited. This is our first book event. So.
Yay.
Someone should hold up the book before we close out on the YouTube.
You can pre-order it on the book selling platform of your choice. So if you're interested, that's good for us if you pre-order our book.
I mentioned the poster.
Yeah, well, it's too complicated.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks again.
Thanks. Thank you all. It was fun.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.